If you've been following my thoughts on twin flames for a while now, you likely remember that it's my theory that a large percentage of twin flames have been raised by narcissists, and as a result have developed certain habits, coping mechanisms, and less than healthy attachment styles as a result, myself included. This is why much of the focus of the healing sessions I offer has to do with gently leading people to see that the very behaviors they have criticized themselves for were really just a natural extension of having been raised by a narcissist. Something that's a bitter pill to swallow for the inner child in many cases. Last night, I learned of something that I believe explains why in the Twin Flame Collective, there is so much we have in common as to how things go down. For me, this explains so much that previously has been unexplainable in large part. What I'm going to share with you is as to a theory called intermittent reinforcement. B.F. Skinner, psychologist, discovered that behavior is motivated by either reward or punishment, and that there is a specific way that rewards can be doled out that causes a behavior to persist over a longer period of time. At first, the rats experienced continuous reinforcement when they learned that every time they pushed a lever, they would receive a pellet of food. Then the reward system was switched up so that only sometimes when they pushed the lever would food be dispensed. There was no predictability, and the rats became obsessed with pushing the lever. Then the experiment was changed to giving no rewards, and yet the rats continued to push the lever while beginning to neglect their own needs, such as grooming. Why am I mentioning this experiment? Because it turns out that the same tactic of intermittent reinforcement is used by many narcissists to keep their victims sticking around and compliant. When rewards are not consistent and there's no predictability, we'll work harder for the reward, especially when we used to get rewarded but now don't. This explains why people often stay in unhealthy, toxic, and abusive relationships. By the way, this tactic is also at play as to gambling and addiction, chasing that high even when there is very little reward and often negative consequences. When intermittent reinforcement is used in an abusive relationship, and yes, it is abuse, the reward is kind of like a hit of dopamine when the abuser shares rare moments of affection, expresses remorse, and allows closeness and intimacy sporadically and less as time goes on. The rewards could come in the form of, for instance, flowers after you've received the silent treatment, gifts after weeks of brutal insults, tears and expressions of remorse after rage, sudden affection and intimacy after hours of fighting and critical remarks. All of this makes relationship victims work harder to once again get back to that honeymoon phase, the rewards. One gets addicted to the breadcrumbs in the relationship and will do almost anything for them. When we can't understand why we or someone else are unable to leave toxic relationships, perhaps it will help to know that the unpredictability is what causes one to become addicted to their partner. When pleasure is predictable in a healthy relationship with, say, a kind and non-toxic partner, our brains get used to it and they produce less dopamine. This kind of explains why it is hard for some counterparts to believe that a kind, loving person can actually be as good as they seem. Why they assume they must be trying to pull one over on them. And also how it is they can take that kind person for granted, or that person becomes a lot less fascinating because the consistency of love and attention causes the dopamine levels to drop. When there's chaos, manipulation, and rejection from our partner, we produce more dopamine when we receive a breadcrumb, causing us to be constantly performing to receive even the tiniest amounts of kindness or affection. We literally become addicted to chasing that high we feel when we're rewarded with attention, sex, affection, even though the remainder of the time we're dealing with deep pain and rejection. Victims begin to ignore or second-guess their gut instincts. It's a very hard cycle to break because victims see even the smallest acts of kindness as evidence that the person can change. And they hold on to hope that one day the relationship will get better, since sometimes their partner can be kind. They have often already invested years of love, time, and energy into the relationship, and their hope for change leads them to ignore the fact that the honeymoon moments are few and far between compared to the bulk of the time involving pain, rejection, and self-doubt. I think you can see how this could apply to both divine counterparts in the way that they deal with each other or don't deal with each other. One will be quite happy to accept breadcrumbs because of that high they feel when their counterpart is actually nice to them or attentive. Because they're always chasing that high, they tolerate treatment that's far less than what they deserve. But accepting breadcrumbs is what they've known their whole life, and they don't understand what is beneath the surface, motivating their desire to even stay in a relationship that everyone around them would say is toxic. This would also explain why so many counterparts are stuck in third-party situations and find it so hard to leave, even when they begin to realize that there's something very unhealthy in the interactions and they're admittedly unhappy. It's hard to give up hope that things will change and become better. So what is the solution? I have no idea. I'm not a therapist, and I don't know what the suggestion would be from a professional. As a non-professional, though, learning about this has actually made me feel better about what's gone on for me in the past few years. Now I understand why I was willing to accept so little and why I fell so easily into the role of chaser and felt I had to work harder and harder to earn respect and affection. It helps to realize I wasn't just chasing a man, but a high. And that's a high I'd been chasing my entire life, from first a parent and then from other partners. Because I'm sure you know by now that we stick with what we're comfortable with. So those of us who were exposed to the tactics of a narcissist as a child, out of habit are going to seek out partners that will provide the same experiences. If we grew up accustomed to our needs not being met or being met quite unpredictably, we naturally attract partners later in life that will also be able to ignore our needs, but for a breadcrumb here or there to keep us put. Of course, something changes as we do our personal work and we begin to see our value. But even so, we can continue to judge ourselves harshly about what we allowed in the past. I stick to my belief that it's a huge step to recognize why we do the things we do. It's the first move toward healing when we become aware that there actually is something to heal.